Welcome to Get Paid for Your Pad, the definitive show on Airbnb hosting, featuring the best advice on how to maximize profits from your Airbnb listing, as well as real-life experiences from Airbnb hosts all over the world. Welcome. We are your hosts, Huzefa Kapadia and Jasper Rivers.
Get paid for your pad. 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 Get paid for your pad.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Get Paid for Your Pad. It's me, Huzefa, and Jasper. Of course. Jasper, how's it going?
Hey man, what's up? Everything's going well.
Nice. Jasper is still in Brazil, gallivanting around, having fun, having a blast. Today we've got a writer on the show, also a fellow Airbnb host as well, and her name is Paula Pant. Paula, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here. So Paula, before we get into all the cool things that you're doing with respect to your blog and writing and hosting and all that stuff, why don't you just tell everybody out there a little bit about yourself?
Sure. In 2008, I quit my 9-to-5 desk job and never went back. I haven't been employed since. And so since then, I traveled for a couple of years and just lived off of savings and came back to the US in 2010. And since then, I've just been... I kind of like to think that everything I do is a little bit of a side hustle. I cobble together enough side hustles to make a good living. So I run a blog. I do various online work, freelance writing, and online marketing and things like that for a handful of clients. And then I also started investing in real estate. And I'm both a traditional landlord, and by traditional I mean I have standard 12-month leases. And I'm also an Airbnb/VRBO host. In fact, that was something that I started kind of on a whim almost a year ago in order to compare the experience of having a vacation rental, like through Airbnb, versus being a long-term landlord, and kind of seeing the pros and cons between the two and figuring out which one I'd rather do.
That's really cool. And by the way, I've read your blog, and you're a great writer. Just out of curiosity, what did you do before? What was your 9-to-5 prior to breaking away?
I was a newspaper reporter. So I wrote for a paper out in Colorado, and it was a lot of fun. I actually really enjoyed it. I hear a lot of people who quit their 9-to-5, and their story typically tends to be, I hated my job, I hated going to work. And I had the opposite experience. I actually loved it. And the pay kind of sucked, but other than that, it was great. Like I worked with really cool people. It was in many ways a dream job. But I didn't have the freedom that I wanted. I couldn't just run off to Brazil the way some of you guys are, you know? And what's cool about being the gig economy, so to speak, getting paid for real estate and online work and all sorts of other things is that you can have a lot more freedom and a lot more flexibility. And that's what I was really drawn to. My blog, by the way, I know we've been talking about it. So Afford Anything is the name of the blog, affordanything.com. I've kind of used it as a brain dump over the past 5 years as I've transitioned from working 9-to-5 to what I do now.
So it's really interesting, and I think with Zepha and myself, we can both relate to your story as we have both left our jobs behind as well. And I just wanted to ask you two questions about that. The first question is, what was your strongest motivation to quit? And the second question is, did you have any fears? Did you have any apprehension about doing? Were you scared of making the decision?
So my strongest motivation to quit came from the fact that I love traveling. It's one of my biggest passions in life. And I can't travel with 2 weeks vacation a year. And the idea that a better job would provide 3 weeks or 4 weeks of vacation a year still didn't appeal to me. I want 20 weeks a year, you know? I want to be able to go anywhere that I want to go without having to submit a form to human resources asking for permission. That just doesn't seem like the way that an adult should be living their life. I've spent my entire childhood asking for permission to do things. I'm 31 years old now. I'm done, you know? So that was my motivation. If I could get my job done remotely from wherever I am, why should I have to be stuck in one spot? That was a strong enough motivation for me to quit. In terms of fears, I had a whole bunch of them. Lots and lots and lots of fears. For one thing, I grew up in a very traditional South Asian household where, I was raised to believe that that you go to school and graduate and get a job and work hard. A very structured, very traditional culture and mentality. And so to break that was not easy. The mental hurdle was probably the most significant thing to get over, much more significant than any logistical hurdle. I was worried that I was committing career suicide, that I would never be able to get a job again. And you know what? I never did get a job again, and it's great.
It's funny you mentioned the South Asian background. I can relate to that because my family is Indian, so I grew up in that type of very education-centered, focused household. Me and my sister as well. So yeah, I can totally relate. That was a big break for me to step away from my career. So good for you.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. My family's Nepalese, and when I was growing up, people never said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" People would say, "Are you going to be a doctor or an engineer?"
That's what my mom and dad are.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's the background I was coming from. So to cut that cord and say, you know what, I'm just gonna be self-employed and see how this works out. Man, that was a big step.
Was your family very happy with that decision?
I had been talking about it for so long that they had gotten used to it by the time I finally did it. Because before I actually quit my job, before I got my job, I was already talking about quitting.
Okay, you mentioned that one of the reasons you quit was because you wanted to travel. So, I love traveling myself, and I'm just curious, what parts of the world did you travel to?
All over the place. I flew to Cairo on a one-way ticket. This was before the revolution, so Cairo was the safer place to travel at that time. And I started off by spending about 6 weeks in Egypt, and then from there I spent a little bit more time in the Middle East. I went over to Israel, and then went to spend a significant amount of time sort of traveling all across Asia. So I went to India for a few months, and then did the traditional Southeast Asia circuit of Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Myanmar, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. Then went down to Australia and New Zealand, spent about 10 months there. And I spent a little bit of time in Europe, not too much, just like about 4 months. And that was about it. That adds up to about 2 years, all in all.
Wow, that's awesome. And then how did you get started with Airbnb? Did you use Airbnb during your travels?
No, I was traveling dirt cheap. So I was staying in hostels that cost $4 a night, $5 a night. So Airbnb was too fancy for me at the time. But how did I get started with Airbnb? I guess, I suppose I knew about it just because I was in the landlord loop. I began investing in rental properties in 2010 when I came back to the US and the market had crashed. Houses were cheap at that time. And everybody was too scared to buy. And, there's that famous quote from Warren Buffett, be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. And everybody was afraid in the bottom of the recession. And so I saw it as an opportunity to pick up a bunch of properties. And so I did. I've got 7 units now that I've accumulated between 2010 to 2014. And so I became really well connected with the landlord loop. And a lot of landlords would talk about Airbnb, and they would, not that many people had done it. They all knew about it, and they all had that question in the back of their minds: should I continue being a traditional landlord, or should I try to expand into this arena? And so I thought I would just put it to the test, run an experiment, and see how it goes.
And so now you ran an experiment, and I believe you have a blog post about it. Tell us the experiment. Give us the rundown and how you documented everything.
Sure. Well, I started off first and foremost. Well, one of the big initial differences is that as an Airbnb host, of course, you have to completely furnish the apartment, not just with furniture, but also with consumables. That's something as a landlord that I wasn't used to doing. So step one was just to get the apartment ready. I had to buy a bed and a dresser and the big things you think about, like you think about a couch, you think about a coffee table. But there are all these little things, the stuff of life that you don't necessarily think about right off the top of your head. But, buying hangers, buying a can opener, buying forks and spoons and a spatula and baking trays and ice cube trays, a plunger for the toilet. Buying all of those took... it didn't take a lot of time. It probably took about 1 or 2 weeks, but it took a lot of brain power to think through what a person would need and come up with all of that from scratch. So that's
why in our book we have a full rundown of all the items that you might want to buy when you prepare for your Airbnb listing. Because I had the same thing. I had to go through my house and literally think, okay, what do people need? Do they need something that I don't need? What's good for somebody who's traveling?
Yeah, exactly. And what was funny is when I first started doing this, a lot of people said to me, they were like, "Oh, yeah, you can just put it on Airbnb until it gets rented out," thinking that it's something that I would only use Airbnb for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. But if you've just spent 2 weeks and more than $1,000, I think I spent about $2,000 furnishing the place, you're not just going to rent it out on Airbnb for a couple of weeks. Because there's so much upfront work that needs to go into making a place vacation rental ready, you're committed to it. You're committed to seeing it through for at least 6 months, just to get back recoup that initial investment.
So you did this price comparison, you invested the money. Now tell us, what did you find? What was the outcome as far as the fixed term rental and the short term rental?
Well, I was surprised by a few things. Number one, before I became an Airbnb host, I thought that vacancy would be significantly higher for obvious reasons. And as a landlord, vacancy is the most expensive thing that you can endure. And fortunately, that wasn't the case. I've had really good occupancy, and part of that is just the art of pricing it right. Part of that comes from putting it at a lower price initially while you're still getting your first few reviews, and then after you have 4 or 5 really good reviews, raising the price. But anyway, to answer your question, among other things, I found that vacancy, at least in my personal experience, was not as big of a profit killer as I had feared it would be. On the other hand, taxes are a huge profit killer because in many localities you have to pay not just your standard income tax, but also sales and occupancy tax, the same as a hotel would pay. And that can be significant, especially if you live in a city, in an urban area, as I do. Utilities are certainly something to consider. We pay, it depends on the season, but anywhere from, we pay about roughly $200-ish per month for utilities, including cable, gas, electricity, all of that. Consumables, I thought would be a profit margin wiper, because I was afraid of having to constantly restock sponges and toilet paper and paper towels and all of those things that people consume. It turned out consumables aren't as much of a price drag as I thought that they would be. And I think a lot of that is because people oftentimes, they'll use things, but they'll also replace things. Not everybody. Some people just use things and then leave you with an empty unit when they check out. But other people will check out and leave you with a full bag of coffee or a full box of tea. And that sounds like a little thing, but if enough people do that, it sort of offsets a lot of those consumable costs. So in the end, I ended up with a net positive of roughly about $500 per month over what I would have made if I had been using this unit as a traditional long-term rental.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned the cost of the electricity, utilities, and consumables. In your experience, is there a big difference between long-term renting and Airbnb in terms
Well,
of?
massive. Yeah. I mean, as a long-term landlord, you typically don't pay electricity or gas for a renter. They put that in their own name and they handle
Right.
those bills themselves.
Ah,
So
okay.
that's $200 a month. I mean, $2,400 a year. That's significant.
Right. Okay. Okay. That's interesting. I used to rent out my house long term, but I always had the utilities included. But I guess
Ah.
you can also have it excluded. What about the consumables? What about the maintenance? Sort of the drag on, sort of normal wear and tear.
Well, that would be the same regardless of whether you're a long-term landlord or an Airbnb host.
Okay. Because one thing that I noticed is when I had a long-term renter in my house, that person was, pretty much always at the apartment. He cooked every night and threw some parties every now and then. And I noticed when I started renting out an Airbnb, I noticed that the kitchen, people didn't really use it very much. So I felt like I was actually getting less wear and tear on that aspect than with my long-term renter.
Yeah, I have actually noticed that same thing, that the kitchen doesn't get used that often. The stove is rarely ever used. And one thing that's kind of nice about, because we clean it so often, we clean it at every turnover, that means the carpets are constantly getting vacuumed. And I'm sure with the number of turnovers that we handle, that we're vacuuming carpets much more than any long-term renter would. I mean, I certainly vacuum the carpet in the Airbnb unit much more than I vacuum the carpets in my own home. And so that level of carpet cleaning, I think, probably helps preserve the life of the carpets. So in that sense, I think that there's an argument that you could be made that there's possibly less wear and tear. But that being said, you do occasionally get the Airbnb guests who just, I don't want to say trash the place, but who are a little bit careless or, spill something or, or whatever else. So I feel like on balance, it's kind of even.
Okay. And you said, so now when you did the comparison after all the costs and everything, I think you said $500 or $600 you came out. What was your baseline?
So I could rent the unit at $1,100 a month. And
then how much did you make total with the Airbnb rentals on average per month?
On average, here, let me look up the blog post so I can make sure that I'm quoting it accurately. Here, I've got the spreadsheet published on my blog on affordanything.com. I've actually published 3 blog posts about this, and I've got a 4th one coming out at the end of December. And I published the spreadsheet, a very detailed spreadsheet on each one. All right. So in the most recent update that I've published on Afford Anything, the average rate is $2,375.62 per month, gross income. So that is a gross income that's about $1,200 higher than what I would be making as a traditional landlord. That said, I've also got additional expenses such as sales and occupancy tax, utilities, consumables, housekeeping, landscaping, all of that. And so because those expenses are higher, the net income per month ends up being $1,705.55. And so compared to the benchmark of $1,100, the difference, the net positive difference, is $605.55 per month.
It's very interesting. Yeah, so you guys definitely check out that blog post because it goes into details as far as exactly what costs that went into the factor of everything that she made and so on. So that's really cool, and hopefully our listeners will check that out. Now, in the year that you've been hosting on Airbnb and VRBO, do you have any interesting guests that come to mind or stories that you want to sort of pass along to our listeners?
Yeah, one thing that's been really cool is that we live fairly close to a theater, like the place where Broadway shows would perform when they come to Atlanta. We live in Atlanta. And so some of our guests have actually been performers in musicals, in touring Broadway musicals. And so one of the first guests that we had were performers in The Lion King. And we actually went and watched them perform. It was a man and his wife, and both of them, the man was one of the lions, and the wife was, I think she was behind the scenes with the show somehow. So we went there, we saw him perform, so we got to see our guest on stage in this off-Broadway production, or Broadway production. And then he actually gave us a backstage tour afterwards. So we got to, meet the guy who played Simba and see the costumes and all of that. So that was really fun, like getting to be a part of that. And actually recently we had another couple that stayed, and the man was a performer in Phantom of the Opera. He was the understudy to the Phantom. And in the mornings, you could actually hear him warm up. You could hear him practice his scales. And every now and again, he'd actually practice a full song. So it was really cool. I could hear it through the wall, because the Airbnb unit is in the same building that I also live in. And we share a common wall between us. And so through the wall, I could actually hear this professional singing, like Phantom of the Opera music. It was unreal. It was so cool to experience. It was like one of my favorite parts of my morning. I'd pour a cup of coffee and listen to this amazing singer.
That's really cool. And I also noticed on your blog post that you had a sort of a last minute problem that you had to solve when two guests unexpectedly brought their children with them.
Yes. So our unit has one bed. It has one queen size bed in it. And if people are bringing additional guests, such as children, or if you've got like a big party of friends who all want to stay, we are happy to put out a queen size air mattress that we have to accommodate the additional guests. So we've got one queen size bed and then the possibility of an air mattress. But if you don't tell us in advance that those additional guests are coming, we're not going to put the air mattress there. We don't keep it there all continuously, because we did that before, and the air mattress, the pump walked away. And so now we keep the air mattress with us in our own unit. And if somebody needs it, we just run it over. It's no big deal. Usually it's no big deal. But we're not always in town. And so there was one weekend when my boyfriend Will and I both flew out to California. And we knew we had a reservation. We had a woman checking in, and she had booked for 2 guests. So we just didn't put out the air mattress. And then she contacts us while we're in California and says, "Hey, where's the air mattress?" And we're like, "Oh no, what do we do?" Because our air mattress had actually sprung a leak. And so the one that we had it wasn't usable. We had figured that we would buy another one the next time that we had a reservation for more than 2 people. But since she had made a reservation for only 2 people, there wasn't that impetus to buy another one. Basically, she had reserved for the wrong number of people. And now that became our problem. And so we called our roommate and asked her to pull the physical mattress off of our bed and carry it to that unit. She tried, but the mattress was way too heavy for her to do that. She'd have to lug it up a flight of stairs. She just wasn't able to do it. And so the kids ended up having to sleep. She brought in extra bedding. She stripped our bed and brought the comforters and pillows and everything like that. And the kids slept on that on the floor. But that was just a really very stressful, very sucky situation, because to me, it really underscored how hard it is to try to manage Airbnb remotely, because those kinds of sudden last minute needs come up. And if you're not physically there to accommodate that need, then you end up with a subpar experience. I mean, certainly her kids, I'm sure, didn't enjoy sleeping on the ground. And it's a kind of a lose-lose situation. Like, we felt bad that we couldn't be there to give her an air mattress. And it just underscores how hard it is to try to manage something like this when you're not physically there.
I see. It's a really interesting story. You are, of course, a super host, which means you've done an outstanding job as a host with your guests. For people listening out there who are either trying to get into the game of Airbnb or want to improve their listing, what advice do you have?
Number one, take lots and lots and lots of photos and spend the time to take really good photos. Go there in the middle of the day when there's good lighting. Stage it well. Make sure that like you put some flowers in the corner to sort of brighten up a corner. Turn all the lights on. Just take that time. You can request the Airbnb send a professional photographer, but sometimes those requests take a while to fulfill. I put in a request in roughly March or April, and the professional photographer came in November. So it took more than 6 months for me to have that one fulfilled. So number one, take the time to take good photos. Number two, when you first put up the listing, price it at a lower price point until you get a couple of good reviews. And once you have those good reviews, then you can raise the price, but you want those good reviews first. And number three, respond to inquiries quickly. Have the Airbnb app on your phone so that you can just quickly answer somebody from your phone, even when you're on the go. Those are probably the top three tips that I would give somebody who wanted to start.
Yeah, I think those are really good tips. I'm surprised it took the Airbnb photographer so long for the appointment. Do you have any idea why?
Yeah, there's only one photographer in Atlanta. So by the way, if you live in Atlanta and you're a photographer and you're looking for work, I totally recommend that you try to photograph at Airbnb. I think they need more Atlanta photographers.
Okay, and this is how long ago?
This was November 2014.
Okay, so it's fairly recently. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. That's way too long.
Yeah.
I will make sure to mention that to the people at Airbnb when I next visit. One quick question about your listing. Mm-hmm. I noticed you have a strict cancellation policy. Mm-hmm. Why did you choose the strict one?
Well, if somebody makes a reservation, then I am, by definition, turning away other potential paying guests in order to accommodate that person's reservation. And so they need to have some skin in the game. I've got skin in the game, so it's only fair that they also put skin in the game.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I've noticed that that when you have a strict cancellation policy, it can also deter people from booking. And that's
fine. I don't want wishy-washy people to book. I only want people who are committed to book, because if I have to hold that spot, then that is going to cost me money out of pocket if that person ends up canceling. And I've held that spot at the expense of somebody else.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that if a person cancels like a week in advance or so, do you think you can still find somebody else?
It's significantly harder. Most of the bookings that I get are several months in advance.
Okay. That's interesting. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Paula, for taking the time to be on our show. We really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's remind our listeners where they can find out more about you.
So my blog is affordanything.com, and I post all of the details of my Airbnb experiment, including very detailed spreadsheets about exactly how much I earn and spend. So if you want just a very comprehensive look at the life of an Airbnb host, I've got it all at affordanything.com. And you can also reach out to me on Facebook.com/affordanything. On Twitter, I'm affordanything. And on Instagram, I'm Paula Pant.
Awesome. And yeah, especially for the people who aren't hosting yet and want to get an idea of what it looks like, I can totally recommend this post, because I've never seen such a detailed post on Airbnb hosting. There's literally screenshots of Excel sheets. You worked all the monetary stuff. You worked it out in 2 decimals. So very transparent, very elaborate, and I think really interesting for people who are thinking about doing Airbnb. So definitely check that out. And thanks again, Paula. And thanks everybody who's listening. Of course, every Monday and Thursday we have another episode coming up. And if you like to know more about Airbnb hosting, check out our blog, getpaidforyourpad.com. There's tons of cool resources on there. For example, you can get the first couple chapters of our book for free. You can also find our book on Amazon, of course. We have a Kindle version as well as a paperback version available. For the show notes, you can check out getpaidforyourpad.com/podcasts, and there you'll find the episode with Paula, and we'll put in the links to her blog so you can go check that out as well. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad.